all of a sudden they go into fat burning mode much quicker. By utilizing ketones, guess what happens? They lose more fat than they lose muscle. So all of a sudden that weight loss becomes fat loss.
Yeah, so many of our patients note that too. They say, man, it just almost feels like moody. They're more moody. They have less tolerance to stress. They're craving things all the time. I mean, it's having your biology run you versus you running your biology.
The other thing I didn't want is I don't want brain disorders. I don't want Alzheimer's, and I don't want dementia, and I don't want Parkinson's, and I don't want ALS. And so why not utilize the fuel the brain wants and actually handles it neurologically different?
Hello and welcome everybody to Unreasonable Health. This is the podcast that can show you how to take your health to the next level with simple solutions. And today we've got one of the most simple solutions available in the form of ketones. They're naturally occurring metabolic products in your body. And I've got an amazing guest on with me today, Gary Millet. And Gary is going to jump into all the science, all the research, everything that you need to know about ketones. He is the founder of Real Ketones. Gary is also somebody who has spent his life as an entrepreneur. He's someone who looks for areas not only in health, but in other arenas, and he's been able to expand those. And so, Gary, welcome to Unreasonable Health. It's great to have you on.
Reagan, thanks so much. Pleasure to be here with everybody.
And you and I have had some interesting conversations over the past months on ketones and how to maximize those using peptides and other solutions. But let's jump in and maybe you could define what a ketone is and why you're such a big fan of like beta hydroxybutyrate and ketone production in the body.
All right, yeah. Let's go back to maybe some Ketones 101. How's that?
Yeah,
does that make some sense? So, generally speaking, the human body is really made up of two real fuel engines. The first one everybody pretty much knows about. They eat carbohydrates. They create glucose. Some people create too much glucose, and they have a insulin sensitivity or a diabetic problem. And then there's this other engine that we call the ketone engine. And what happens when people don't have enough glucose in their system, that the body actually transforms itself into being able to utilize whatever you have as fat stores and converts that fat into something called a triglyceride. And that triglyceride ultimately ends up being transformed into this thing called a ketone. And mainly the ketone beta hydroxybutyrate. Yeah. So what's so unique about BHB is that it has basically 2.5 times the energy of glucose. More importantly, the body's preferred fuel, because the number one organ that your body has operating itself is the brain. And the brain's favorite fuel is this thing called BHB. And what makes that so exceptional is that not only does it have more energy than glucose, but it has a lot more what you would call metabolic pollutants. So when people notice that they have you've talked a lot, Reagan, about free radicals. The amount of free radicals that are built when people digest ketones or use ketones for fuel is 46 times less than when they're actually using glucose.
Wow.
And so this amazing, powerful molecule, BHB, is something that happens when people go into this state called ketosis. So fast forward, this has been obviously since evolution. Can you pause for a second?
Yep. Yeah, good. It's all good. You can keep going.
Okay,
Don't
hold
worry
on.
about your dog. Oh, you need to get
hold
him?
on.
So it seems like these ketones, just from what you're sharing, Gary, not only are they advantageous when it comes to the metabolic process in our body, but we can access far more energy from these ketones than we can from glucose. And then one of the biggest things you mentioned is weight loss. And is weight loss something that people see pretty quickly when they're in ketosis, or what's been your observation?
Well, here's what's impressive about that is that let's go back to what people really do want out of weight loss if we could. So when people go into a calorie restricted diet, and you know this with your patients as well, is calorie restriction will actually reduce your weight, but it's not always going to reduce what you want to lose. So in a calorie restricted diet, a lot of people lose muscle versus fat. And so when they stop doing their calorie restricted diet and they go back to normal eating, they've lost a huge percentage of that weight due to muscle loss instead of fat loss.
Yeah.
And there's a big reason for that. What people need to really understand about a diet is that that's not what the body wants to do. So the number one objective of the body's metabolism is to store energy. You would think, wow, isn't its number one job to utilize energy? No. The number one job of the body is to preserve your life and store energy. And so the last thing to be burned is fat. Why? Because fat has a lot more energy than glucose or muscle. And so it's the last thing that gets burned. So when somebody goes into a calorie restricted diet, it first burns up all your glycogen, all your glucose. That's the first thing that happens. The second thing that happens is it burns up all your available amino acids. And then it will start attacking some of your proteins. And then in a week or so, then it will start burning your fat. So when people go into ketosis by a rapid change in decreasing their carbohydrates, all of a sudden they go into fat burning mode much quicker. Mm-hmm. And so by utilizing ketones, guess what happens? They lose more fat than they lose muscle. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden that weight loss becomes fat loss. And that's exactly the desired effect, because when you lose fat, your body doesn't have a tendency to want to have to regain that muscle. And so you stay more satiated. You get less hungry. And then the flip side to that is when you do lose all that muscle, what happens is you then gain more fat. Yeah. So this whole concept of recidivism, right? What happens in 95% of the cases that people go on a calorie restricted diet, guess what they do? They actually end up weighing more about 6 months later after they've stopped that diet.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I've seen that, when there was the big, when HCG first came out, 20 years ago, I saw the clients on the 15, sure. They're on the 800 calorie, 900, 1200 calorie diet. I was like, well, anyone's going to lose weight on that, but they didn't have the hunger associated with it. And then their thyroids would tank, usually it's about a year later, and they would go hypothyroid because your body's in starvation mode. So it's turning down that metabolic rate. And so what you're saying is with ketosis, what you've seen is people can actually lose the fat without sacrificing that caloric restriction for too long, and also be burning fat as an energy source, which, that's, who doesn't want to burn their fat as an energy source? And especially when you look at visceral fat, which can trigger, the arteriosclerosis in the body and heart disease. You've got to get it off just from a health perspective. You remove vanity altogether, but removing some of that visceral fat's really important. So if you think about, some of the supplements that you've made, as you guys have jumped into that world, what are some of the benefits of using, the beta hydroxybutyrate or the real ketones or any of these supplements, to trigger this impact? Does it mean that people don't have to be so stringent on the ketogenic diet, or what benefit do they have?
Well, this is what's very interesting is that ketones, you would think, well, if I'm either in a glycolytic state or I'm in a ketogenic state, that has to be either I'm in one or I'm in another. Okay. Yeah. So what we invented here was something called exogenous ketones. And what is interesting about that is that what we have, when you take an exogenous ketone, it doesn't matter what state of glucose fed you are. The body will automatically uptake the ketones in preference to glucose.
Yeah.
So the brain, the heart, the lungs, your major organs will all uptake the ketones in preference to glucose. Now, what does that really do? Well, when you feed the brain, you automatically become happier. Yeah. Okay. And when the brain does not think you're in starvation, or it does not think you're at high deprivation of caloric intake, it acts normally. It keeps your metabolism up. Yeah. So when people go into a calorie restricted diet, one of the biggest dangers, as you know, is their metabolism slows down. And when your metabolism slows down, what's the first thing that happens? You burn less calories. Yeah. And so when you're in a state of taking like exogenous ketones, first of all, you get that huge appetite suppression. You get that great mood. Mm-hmm. It goes on to spur activities that are metabolically inclined. And so guess what? You start burning more and more calories. And even if you just shrink down the amount of carbs in that diet, all of a sudden you're starting to burn more fat than you are muscle. Yeah. And this is so helpful. And then the other thing that happens is when people accidentally eat too many carbs, if they were in a regular ketogenic diet, guess what? It pushes them right out and they start over again. So somebody who wants to go into a low carb diet and they really want to get rid of that weight and they want to get rid of that fat, then exogenous ketones really accelerates that process because it's a chemical that the body has endogenously, but when you feed it to the body exogenously, wow, the body takes it up. It feels like normal. It goes through the same process of burning calories, and it burns then more fat than it burns muscle.
Got it. And that's, there's a couple ways of doing, obviously, using some of the BHBs, exercise. Have you looked at exercise and ketosis? Is this like we're fasting in an exercising in a fasted state, or you'll see greater levels of like you can get in ketosis faster. Have you guys done much research on that?
You can get in ketosis faster because what'll end up happening is you'll burn your glucose stores first.
Sure.
And so what happens is when you're supplementing with ketones, your energy level stays high. You burned off your glucose. And now what are you doing? You're now starting lipolysis, which means you're burning off your fat.
Mm.
So one of the most interesting things is there's hardly a long distance runner today, long distance biker, rower, whatever, that doesn't use ketones.
Yeah. Wow.
And the reason for that is that as you enter this really cool state of ketosis, whether endogenously or the easy way through supplementation, what ends up happening is that you find yourself in this amazing state of kind of mental euphoria. You get a much higher level of brain focus because, again, the way ketones are utilized in the brain provides so much more energy per gram than glucose. You now have this period of time where you end up being in what they call the zone. And I'm sure you've had that moment where it seems like time passes by so quickly, or it seems like no matter what you do, you can't do anything wrong.
Yeah. Flow state.
Flow state.
Yeah.
So in that flow state, you are really rolling on ketones. That's where your anxiety drops because ketones have been shown to be a major. We did a study utilizing exogenous ketones, Reagan. We were able to show a drop of normal stress and anxiety by 40%.
Wow.
So can you imagine going into a dietary event, okay, where you're reducing calories, you're needing energy, you have more stress and anxiety during that point, and all of a sudden this amazing thing called an exogenous ketones ameliorates every one of those side effects and helps promote fat burning.
Yeah.
That's the magic. That's what this miracle molecule that the body evolved in using does.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, and it's kind of interesting because if you think of strategies, one is, people can do starvation, caloric restriction, or they can exercise, in excess of the calories they're consuming. That's always a way of doing it. But pretty soon you end up with inflammatory markers. Your homocysteine goes up. It seems like ketones are big, not only for people who just want to lose weight, but from what you're saying, it's actually also in people who are interested in improving their sports performance.
Well, that's really a super point. One of the things you see in sport performance is obviously pre, during, and post. And what's very interesting about that is that you are able, using exogenous ketones, to actually harness something called a dual fuel zone. So when you start off with any type of really high intensity exercise, you may end up having a glucose burn, okay? But ketones comes in and helps with, when you're not in that particular zone, you're burning ketones in this really preferred energy zone. And so you have a perfect combination of glucose and ketones. But more importantly, what the ketones aren't doing is creating the lactic acid. And they're not creating that reactive oxygen species that those free radicals we're talking about.
Yeah.
So what's been noticed in athletes who really have taken advantage of utilizing exogenous ketones is that when they load up with exogenous ketones to start, they already have ample stores of glucose. And during that whole process of utilizing both fuels, at the end, because they haven't created that lactic acid, because they haven't created those free radicals, their recovery is so much quicker. And more importantly, what you named before, I couldn't even stress as much as you did, is that what happens is you see a reduction of inflammation, a significant reduction of inflammation. And as an athlete, the one thing you want to get rid of as quickly as you can is inflammation.
Yeah. And so, if you look at some of the side effects, I know, certain ketones people have had, like stomach upsets, or they get disaster pants. I mean, what have you seen? Sorry for the visual, but
that was quite a visual there, Reagan. That's good. I love that.
What have you seen with real ketones? Is there anything you guys have done to mitigate that, or to make it a little more digestive friendly, or any kind of mechanism of action you're aware of that causes that?
One of the things that, if we wanted to stay on athletic performance for a second, right, in conjunction with your question, one of the things that we have been able to do with BHB is connect it to electrolytes. So we can produce a BHB, what we call a BHB electrolyte, where we have sodium, potassium in balance, magnesium and calcium in balance. And so not only are you getting the energy molecule for the BHB, you're also getting the hydration. And when people are doing one of two things, they're either doing high athletic performance. We all know the importance of those essential electrolytes. And then when people are doing a lower carb diet, we're also seeing the potentiation of needing more electrolytes. And that's because glucose as a molecule holds on to a lot of water. So when people are really heavy into utilizing glucose for their fuel, they have a tendency to be a little bit more puffed up. They have a little bit more inflammation. But when they're in more of a ketogenic state, they lose a lot of that. They lose a lot of that water weight, if you will. And as you lose water, of course, your electrolytes go out. And so by being able to supplement with exogenous ketones, you're not only accomplishing all of the key energy requirements that you have, you're not only including all of the appetite suppression, but you're also hydrating your body. And so getting back to the GI tract, a lot of people were utilizing MCT oil, as you probably know, right? Oh, yeah. Well, if you really want one of the most effective laxatives in the world, take 30 milliliters of MCT oil and see how that works for you. That's the that's the fast pants, right?
Yeah, that's it.
But if you balance, as we've balanced in our supplementation, the electrolytes properly, then you just don't get any of that GI distress, and you just don't get any of that stomach upset. Now, there are other forms of BHB. One, of course, is an ester, but esters are very tough to tolerate, and they give people a lot of stomach upset if when they take enough to be effective. So somebody takes 30 grams of an ester, most likely you're going to get stomach upset from that process.
Yeah. Well, and you guys have done some unique things as well. I mean, you've got specific ketone blends. Not only have you attached them with electrolytes, which I think is brilliant, but you're starting to think about putting some adaptogens in there, and you've got the hormone complex. And so you've
That's
taken
correct.
it and got very niche in its delivery and mechanism. And, if you kind of look into the future, what's some of the ongoing research that you guys are doing, and where do you see the development of ketones going?
Well, one of the big areas that we see is in this area of ready to drink beverages.
Yeah.
And instead of taking 30 grams of sugar, which a lot of these so-called energy drinks require or provide, why not take energy-rich ketones? So one of the things that we've been able to do is utilize pure BHB acid in with certain blend of BHB salts to give the most rapid action, least amount of electrolytes necessary for that particular function. So we're able to engineer almost every single product to what is desired as an end use for that product. So what we have for a brain product, like you were just mentioning earlier, we will do different from a hydration product, different from a fasting product, different from a pure recovery or energy product. So with our ability to engineer utilizing BHB in its many formats, we can engineer that to deliver exactly what we need to just exactly the audience we're targeting the product to.
Yeah. And that's some impressive science, because there's just so many people out there pushing these BHB products, but you guys have seemed to have gotten very selective and scientific about where they need to go. And so, I guess some of the other things is, if you look at misconceptions out there, I mean, what would you say the most common misconceptions are around BHB?
I think I would say the biggest misconception is not understanding that it's not just something to take until you've accomplished something. So a lot of people will utilize BHB in their fasting in their weight loss protocol until they've lost the weight. When what they should be realizing is that by continuing to utilize BHB throughout their day-to-day life, they're missing out on all of the other benefits that BHB is delivering, especially to what you're trying to accomplish with your glucose control. And more importantly, there's a lot of people very concerned about their brain today. We see a hockey stick rise in dementia. We see a hockey stick rise in Alzheimer's. We see a big increase in stress and anxiety. So those people who have actually gone through utilizing BHB for their weight loss have now discovered how important it is to your daily metabolic routine. And we see those applications being far more extensive and long-term than people are seeing today. So the misconception that BHB is supposed to be utilized in the keto diet is really completely flipped from what BHB should probably be used in your daily diet.
Mm.
And so if I can give you, I've been low carb myself. I think you and I have talked about that. I've been low carb keto for about 8 years now.
Yeah.
But every single day, I am taking at least 15 grams of exogenous ketones. And I cannot tell you how much it adds more to just having endogenous ketones. And so when you think about what is it you want in your lifestyle, what are your goals? Okay. Well, it's more, I'm going to give you kind of an interesting answer to that. I think it's what I don't want. Okay. So I decided a long time ago when I did all the research for this and we built the products, we built exogenous ketones. We're now doing some really incredible studies with them. But here's what I decided I didn't want in my life. I decided I didn't want to be overweight. I decided I didn't want to have food as my addiction. Mm. So when you take exogenous ketones every day, you get this very unique appetite suppression that allows you to make the very best food choices of every meal. Because, when you're not hungry, you make the absolute best food choices as opposed to when you are hungry. And that in and of itself has improved the quality of the food I've selected and the quality of the food I ate. The next thing I didn't want is I don't want diabetes. Mm. Somebody who is ketogenic by nature can't be a type 2 diabetic because you're basically utilizing ketones and fatty acids for your fuel source instead of glucose. And so all of a sudden you put less pressure, you're no longer insulin sensitive, and all of a sudden your pancreas calms down and you are no longer a diabetic. The other thing I didn't want is I don't want brain disorders.
Yeah.
I don't want Alzheimer's and I don't want dementia and I don't want Parkinson's and I don't want ALS. And so why not utilize the fuel the brain wants and actually handles it neurologically different? So I don't want that. And then you probably know and have probably talked about this before, is that a lot of people don't realize that cancer in our lives is obviously a major contributor to death, but cancer relies on glucose as its fuel source. It struggles being able to utilize ketones for its fuel source. And so there's so much research right now being done on how ketones can ameliorate some of the impact of tumors, its role in chemotherapies. And I just decided I don't want that in my life as well. Then the other thing I wanted as much as anything is I want that mental acuity and focus that you get when you strip away stress and anxiety and you get sharper in terms of your multitasking. I like that alertness. And I can tell anyone who's listening right now, if they want to try the difference between being on a glucose-fed brain and being on a ketone-fed brain, you will notice especially the difference if you ever go off the ketone-fed brain.
Yeah.
You go back to that fog. You've experienced that yourself, haven't you, Reagan?
Oh, yeah. It's so many of our patients note that too. They say, man, it's just almost feels different. Like moody. They're more moody. They have less tolerance to stress.
Yeah.
They're craving things all the time. I mean, it's having your biology run you versus you running your biology.
Couldn't agree more. So maybe it's the things I don't want in life
Yeah.
that is really propelling me towards this type of a regimen. And I can't I can't stress to the athletes who are listening how much more power you get from your workout by pumping uh, exogenous ketones every workout.
Yeah.
So I work out in the morning and I get up, and the first thing I'm guzzling before my workout is exogenous ketones. And just amazing how much less inflammation I build up during that process. My recovery is like so quick.
Mm. Yeah, and I've noticed that as well. And I think, if you just look at the science behind it, I think there's a lot of advantages on so many levels. And one of the interesting things you don't want is Alzheimer's. And that's, if anyone makes it over the age of 80, that's really the big risk that you've got there is, you're pretty much a lot more warded against cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, but not Alzheimer's. So this is where ketones is an optimized fuel source for the brain.
Well, it's interesting you had mentioned the cardiac aspect of this, because the second organ that prefers ketones is the heart, and the heart works very, very well on ketones and fatty acids. It works much less effectively on glucose, and so cardiovascular disease, of course, is another huge killer of our population. But it all kind of starts with looking at what do you, and this is what I love about your practice. And I'll just kind of give you the kudos. You look at the human body in such a holistic, complete metabolic engine where not one thing is separate from another thing. It's all integrated. And it's that integration that you bring to your practice that I think is so outstanding. And that's why I believe exogenous ketones belongs dead center in improving that overall metabolic performance. And how many times have we talked about, well, if you improve metabolic performance, you're going to also improve your longevity.
Yeah.
And so I'll give you kind of a little bit of an insight to what we're studying right now. In the area of longevity, there are a number of things that we've all noticed. One of them is the amount of energy that a 25-year-old has versus a 65-year-old is pretty predictable and noticeable. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's caused from two reasons. The first reason is as you age, you lose mitochondria. So the amount of mitochondria in your body producing energy when you're 25 versus the number of mitochondria in your body at 65 is quite different. Then the other thing we've noticed through our research is the amount of ATP produced by the mitochondria is less when you're 65 than when you're 25.
Yeah.
So one of the secrets to what we've been testing, and I'll give your audience kind of a first glimpse of it, is there's two things that are happening. We talked a little bit earlier about reactive oxygen species, ROS. Well, you know how we have in our environment a little problem we call global climate change?
Sure.
Well, there's two issues with carbon dioxide. One is we're producing too much of it. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The second one is we have too much of it already in the atmosphere. So the one problem is you got to stop producing carbon dioxide. But the other problem is, how do you get rid of it? So the body in the mitochondria, when you age, is the same fundamental problem. We've now discovered that cells build up ROS. And as they build that up, it now causes dysfunction with the mitochondria being able to build more ATP. So this autophagy, or the cleaning out of the reactive oxygen species, cleaning out of the senescent cells, or the partially functioning or dead cells that are there, starts to improve mitochondrial function from a standpoint of more ATP production. It also, we found a very interesting connection between the nucleus of the cell and the mitochondria of the cell. So like in Star Trek, Captain Kirk calls down to the control room, Scotty, I need more power, right?
Right.
Well, if there's no more power, then you can't kind of jump to that warp speed, if you will. So what we're actually starting to find is the epigenetic connections, Reagan, where if the engine room, the mitochondria, have plenty of energy, they signal to the nucleus, you know what? We have enough energy to proliferate. So all of a sudden you can start seeing the growth in the number of mitochondria as well as the functionality of mitochondria. So if we can reverse the curve to where at 25, you had twice the amount of energy as 65, to where a 65-year-old can have the same energy they had as a 25-year-old, we think that is going to have maybe the most profound effect on aging that anyone's found. And that's an avenue we're really exploring.
Man. Well, because if you look at the 9 hallmarks of aging, you've got mitochondrial dysfunction, you've got loss of nutrient sensing, you've got telomere shortening. I mean, you've got genomic instability. You've got all these things that just by changing the metabolic health of a human, those all get reversed. And it seems like today what I've gotten out of this conversation is that ketones, not only do they help in nutrient sensing, because now you have a preferred source of energy, but they could actually be part of that solution for reversing mitochondrial dysfunction, which is phenomenal. And so this has been amazing, Gary. And one of the things that all of you listeners, we're going to have the opportunity for you guys to be able to try some real ketones and to use those. So we'll make sure that we'll include that link in the show notes, and you guys will hear more about that. But the other thing is you'll be able to get these ketones, some of these products at East West. So just reach out to us. And you can call us at 801-582-2011, and we'll make sure that you try these out. So, and Gary, your team's been amazing. I love working with Rob and Bonnie, and you guys are just class acts. So,
thank you so much.
Oh yeah, no, it's been amazing. And any final thoughts that you've got, or any words of advice as people start on this ketogenic pathway?
I think that I think that the interesting part, the best story I ever, one of the things that convinced me more than anything else is when we first started down this path, we were doing some work with a group of people who were diagnosed as having chronic fatigue. And I'm sure you come across that a lot.
Oh yeah.
That is a really big thing. And I sat down with this one individual named Andrew, and I was talking to him because I came from the athletic community where our whole thing was, look, if you don't want to gain weight, just go to the gym and exercise and just don't eat, right? That was our solution.
Yeah.
Our solution is, maybe you're just lazy, or our solution was, maybe you shouldn't eat as many potato chips and you should go to the gym and just get off that couch.
Yep.
Right. And that was my attitude when we first started down this pathway. But, Reagan, when this guy, Andrew, and I were talking, he looked me straight in the eye and he said something really that stuck with me all these years. He said, what if you can't get off the couch? We have discovered probably the single most powerful macronutrient ever discovered, called BHB. And it allows people like Andrew to get off the couch. It facilitates the goals you have without you having to facilitate them all by yourself. It's just like having your own coach in the corner. The more you do it, the more powerful it gets you, the better attitude you have, the better mood you have. You can't imagine what you can do with all the energy you need. That's what propels people in order to do their best. More energy, more opportunity. That's what I believe BHB delivers more than anything.
Man, well, I love that, and I think that's I think it's amazing because it's the easiest thing. It's low hanging fruit the way I see it, and what you guys are doing, Real Ketones, is just you guys are helping so many people. And Gary, I appreciate the time you've taken today. Thank you for sharing with our community, and for those of you who would like to learn more, what's the best website for people to go to, Gary?
Realketones.com. That's RealKetones.com.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And really appreciate all you guys for listening. If you like the show, make sure you give us a 5-star rating and share this with your friends and loved ones. Thanks, everybody.